April 28, 1945. A gas station in Milan, Italy. A furious crowd gathers around a lifeless body, kicking, spitting, screaming. The corpse is dragged, beaten, then hoisted upside down from the steel beams of the station roof for everyone to see. That body once belonged to one of the most powerful men in Europe. He invented modern fascism, inspired Adolf Hitler, and promised to resurrect the Roman Empire. Instead, he ended his life like a hunted animal, dangling above a mob that had once worshipped him. This is the rise and savage fall of Benito Mussolini, how a schoolteacher's son became a dictator, plunged his country into war, and paid the ultimate price. If you want more unfiltered, hard-hitting stories that expose the ugliest corners of history, hit subscribe to Timeless World right now. Turn on notifications so you never miss when we drag another tyrant into the spotlight. Part 1. From Angry Kid to Radical. Benito Mussolini was born on July 29, 1883, in a small town in northern Italy, the son of a blacksmith father and a schoolteacher mother. Money was tight, and his father's affairs and political obsessions didn't help. The house was full of arguments about socialism, revolution, and class struggle. Young Benito stood out in school for two things: intelligence and violence. He was bright, but he was also hot-tempered and aggressive. At one point, he was expelled for stabbing another boy with a knife during a fight. That tendency to answer problems with force would define his entire life. In 1902, Mussolini skipped the country, slipping into Switzerland to dodge Italian military service. There, he lived like a drifter, doing odd jobs, sleeping rough, and throwing himself into radical socialist politics. He spoke at rallies, helped organize strikes, and was arrested more than once for inciting unrest. But even in this early phase, he didn't just want justice, he wanted power and attention. Eventually, Switzerland kicked him out. Mussolini returned to Italy, reluctantly did his military service, and then turned to journalism. His real weapon wasn't a rifle, it was his mouth and his pen. Part 2. The socialist star who switched sides. Back in Italy, Mussolini climbed fast through the socialist movement. He became editor of Avanti, the main newspaper of the Italian Socialist Party, and used his skills as a fiery writer and speaker to rally workers and attack the establishment. Then World War I erupted in 1914. Most Italian socialists opposed the war, calling it a slaughter for the benefit of kings and capitalists. At first, Mussolini agreed. Then he changed. He realized war meant chaos, and chaos meant opportunity. He argued that war could shatter the old order and open the door to revolution. He suddenly began calling for Italy to join the conflict, a stance that enraged his comrades. In 1914, he was forced out as editor and expelled from the Socialist Party. Mussolini founded his own pro-war paper and backed Italy's entry into the fight in 1915. He did serve in the army and was wounded in a training accident, but the real transformation wasn't physical, it was ideological. When he came home, he wasn't a socialist anymore. He had watched angry veterans return with no jobs, no respect, and a deep hatred of politicians. He saw businessmen and landowners terrified of a Russian-style revolution. He realized he could build something new out of that fear, a movement that promised strength, order, and national greatness, not equality. Part 3. Birth of Fascism and the Black Shirts. In 1919, Mussolini launched the Fasci di Combattempo in Milan, a new movement that mixed nationalism, anti-socialism, and street violence. Their symbol, the fasces, a bundle of rods with an axe blade, was stolen from ancient Rome, meant to evoke unity and authority. The movement's muscle came from the black shirts, squads of ex-soldiers and thugs in black uniforms. They didn't argue with opponents, they busted heads. They stormed union offices, wrecked printing presses, and beat political enemies in public squares. Their goal wasn't just to win, it was to terrorize. In the early elections, Mussolini's movement barely registered. He won only a handful of votes. But while democratic parties argued in parliament, his men were taking over the streets. Industrialists, landowners, and conservatives who feared socialism quietly funded the fascists, seeing them as a useful weapon. Mussolini offered something simple to a humiliated Italy. No more chaos, no more strikes, a strong leader to restore national pride. Part 4. The March on Rome, a bluff that worked. By 1922, Italy was in turmoil, economic problems, political deadlock, and the constant threat of socialist uprisings. Mussolini knew it was time to make his move. In October, he announced a march on Rome. Fascist squads began seizing local government offices and railway stations, and about 30,000 black shirts gathered near the capital. They were not a real army. If the Italian military had been ordered to fire, they would have been crushed. Mussolini, carefully, didn't march with them. He stayed in Milan, waiting. The existing government tried to declare martial law to stop the fascists. All that was needed was the king's signature. King Victor Emmanuel III blinked. Fearing civil war and hoping Mussolini could restore order, he refused to sign the martial law decree and instead invited Mussolini to form a new government. Mussolini took a night train to Rome wearing a black suit, not a uniform. No dramatic battle, no storming of palaces, just a calculated bluff and a weak monarch. By the end of October 1922, Benito Mussolini was Prime Minister of Italy. Part 5. Killing democracy and building a cult. Once in power, Mussolini moved carefully at first. He still faced a parliament and a king, and he needed time to cement control. The turning point came in 1924. A socialist parliamentarian, Giacomo Matteotti, dared to denounce fascist violence and election fraud in public. Within days, fascist thugs kidnapped him. He was beaten and murdered, his body dumped outside Rome. The outrage was huge, but Mussolini gambled again. In early 1925, he delivered a speech accepting political, moral, and historical responsibility, and then used the crisis to move even harder against his enemies. Opposition parties were shut down, independent newspapers silenced, and critics exiled or imprisoned. A special political police and courts were created to deal with subversives. At the same time, he constructed a powerful cult of personality, Il Duce, the leader. He posed for newsreels plowing fields, working in factories, or doing sports, trying to appear tireless and superhuman. The regime claimed he hardly slept, that he was the genius guiding every aspect of Italian life. Schools rewrote textbooks. Children joined state-run youth groups, swore loyalty to Il Duce, and marched in uniform. The Catholic Church, after a deal known as the Latin Accords in 1929, helped legitimize his rule in exchange for guarantees of its power. Behind the propaganda, Italy had become a one-party police state. Part 6. Empire Dreams and War Crimes. Mussolini wasn't satisfied ruling just Italy. He wanted an empire to match his Roman fantasies. Italy had already seized Libya before his rise, but resistance there was strong. Under Mussolini, the repression intensified. Concentration camps, mass deportations, and brutal campaigns against local rebels led to tens of thousands of deaths. Then, in 1935, he went after Ethiopia, then called Abyssinia, one of the last independent African states. The Italian military had superior weapons and aircraft, but when the fighting got tough, Mussolini authorized the use of chemical weapons, including poison gas dropped from the air, clearly banned by international agreements. Villages were bombed, civilians targeted, and the invasion turned into a showcase of modern colonial brutality. The League of Nations condemned the invasion, but
did little else. Mussolini saw that as a green light. He now believed that democracies were weak, indecisive, and afraid to act. Part 7. Hitler, the Pact of Steel, and Disaster. In the early 1930s, many European leaders hoped Mussolini might help contain Adolf Hitler. Instead, the two men grew closer. Mussolini had inspired some of Hitler's ideas, and Hitler admired his seizure of power. At first, Mussolini looked down on the German upstart, but as Nazi Germany rearmed and conquered, the balance shifted. By 1939, Italy and Germany sealed their alliance in the Pact of Steel, pledging mutual military support. Mussolini dreamed that at Germany's side, he would carve out a new Roman Empire across the Mediterranean. When Hitler invaded Poland in September 1939, Mussolini stayed out at first, aware that Italy was militarily and economically unprepared. But once Germany's lightning victories mounted, Mussolini feared being left out of the spoils. In June 1940, he declared war on Britain and France, hoping to grab easy gains as they fell. Instead, he stumbled into catastrophe. Italian forces performed poorly in North Africa and Greece, forcing Hitler to repeatedly bail them out. Italian troops, later sent to the Eastern Front, suffered horrific losses in the Soviet winter. At home, rationing, bombing, and defeat shattered the myth of Il Duce's genius. Part 8. Overthrown, rescued, and turned into a puppet. By 1943, the Axis had lost North Africa, Allied forces were invading Sicily, and American bombers were hitting Italian cities, including Rome. The fascist Grand Council, seeing the writing on the wall, turned on Mussolini. On July 25, 1943, they voted to remove him. Even his son-in-law supported the move. The king summoned Mussolini to the palace, informed him he was dismissed, and had him arrested and taken away. A new government began secret talks with the Allies and soon surrendered, switching sides. Hitler refused to let Italy go. In a daring raid in September 1943, German commandos rescued Mussolini from his mountain prison and flew him to German-occupied northern Italy. There, under Nazi pressure, he became the head of a new puppet state, the Italian Social Republic, based in the town of Salo. But Mussolini was no longer the swaggering Duce. He was tired, sick, and clearly subordinate to German officers. He ordered purges of former allies, including his own son-in-law, who was executed for treason. Thousands of Italian Jews were rounded up and deported to Nazi death camps during this phase, a stark escalation in persecution. Part 9. Flight, Capture, and Execution. By April 1945, Germany was collapsing. Allied troops and Italian partisans were closing in from all sides. Mussolini knew the end had come. On April 25th, he fled Milan with his mistress, Clara Petacci, and a small group of loyalists, trying to escape north toward Switzerland and then possibly Spain. They joined a convoy of retreating German troops, hoping to hide among them. On April 27th, near Lake Como, Italian partisans stopped the column at a small village checkpoint. They allowed most of the Germans to pass, but searched the vehicles for Italian fascists. In one truck, they spotted a heavy-set man in a German coat and helmet, slumped in the back, trying not to make eye contact. It was Benito Mussolini. The disguise fooled no one. He was separated from the Germans and taken into custody, along with Petacci. The partisans decided he should not be handed over to the Allies. They wanted Italian justice, fast. On April 28th, Mussolini and Petacci were driven to the Villa Belmonte, near the village of Giulino. There, in front of a stone wall by the gate, they were ordered out of the car. One partisan, Walter Audicio, attempted to shoot Mussolini with his own weapon, but it jammed. He grabbed another gun and opened fire, killing Mussolini and Petacci in the road. Just like that, Il Duce was a corpse. Part 10. Piazza Loreto, the final display. The bodies were loaded into a truck and taken to Milan, to Piazza Loreto, a square with grim symbolism. Months earlier, fascist authorities had executed partisans there and left their bodies on display as a warning. Now the roles were reversed. In the early hours of April 29th, the corpses of Mussolini, Petacci, and other fascist leaders were dumped on the ground in the square. By morning, a huge crowd had gathered. People who had lived under fascist rule for 2 decades, who had lost family in war, prison, or occupation, saw their former dictator lying in the dirt. What followed was ugly and brutal. The crowd insulted, kicked, and spat on the bodies. Leaders eventually had the corpses hoisted upside down from the iron beams of a nearby gas station canopy to keep the mob from tearing them apart completely. Photos from that day, still easily found online, show Mussolini's body battered and barely recognizable. The man who built an entire regime on fear and staged images of his own power now served as a warning himself. This is what happens when a whole nation finally turns on its tyrant. Closing and final call to action. Benito Mussolini tried to reinvent himself over and over. Socialist, soldier, journalist, strongman, emperor. He built a state on propaganda, violence, and the promise of national greatness. He silenced critics, waged colonial wars, and tied his country's fate to Nazi Germany. In the end, he lost everything. His power, his empire, even his dignity. His last stage was not a balcony in Rome, but a gas station in Milan, hanging upside down as a broken symbol of a failed ideology. If you want more stories that show how dangerous unchecked power really is, and how history treats those who abuse it, make sure you hit that like button so this story reaches more people. Subscribe to Timeless World for weekly dives into the darkest chapters of our past. Drop a comment. Did Mussolini's fate fit his crimes, or did it go too far? This is Timeless World. See you in the next one.